Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Ha, the director of the MIT List Visual Arts Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome Gregory Volk to MIT. And tonight's lecture series was named in honor of Dorothy and Dr. Leroy Lavine. And the Lavines, two prominent Boston art patrons and longtime supporter of the list. And they've also were on the MIT Council for the Arts and also our list advisory committee. And thanks to them, we have fantastic pieces in our collection, and so we are grateful to them. And it is because of them we have this lecture series. And I was told that Zach, the grandson, is here tonight, so is it okay if I recognize you and we clap on behalf in your grandparents' honor? So thank you, and we are grateful to the Lavines. Gregory Volk, I mean, I'm so excited that you guys are here to witness Gregory Volk, because he's a fantastic New York-based art critic and a curator, and his art writings often appear in Art in America and Art Forum, and also in Parquet and Sculpture magazine. And Gregory has curated numerous exhibitions, and he's worked with Joan quite a bit. And so we are delighted that he's here tonight. Gregory received his Bachelor of Arts from Colgate University and an MA from Columbia University. He's also the associate professor in the School of Arts at Virginia Commonwealth University. And if you don't know what's going on down there, it's kind of exciting, you know. I think they're building a Stephen Hull buildings, and they're going to have a contemporary art museum. And Lisa Fryman, who was the commissioner for the 54th Venice Biennale with Allora Calzadilla, and Jennifer Allora, who was a student here, and she's the new director, and they hired Lauren Ross, who was a curator who worked with me at White Column, so things seem to be happening down there in Virginia and Richmond. We invited Gregory because Joan Jonas, who has taught at MIT for over 15 years, and who is now the professor emerita at the Art, Culture, and Technology Department, has a distinct honor of being of presenting United States at the 56th Venice Biennale and to present her work at the U.S. Pavilion. And it is the List Visual Arts Center's honor to support her work. And so we are just truly delighted that we are able to have this presence in Venice. And Joan seems to be everywhere right now. And, you know, when I approached her 2 years ago to present her as a possibility for Venice, she immediately said no, and then I talked her into it, saying, I think we can put a team together and it's going to happen. And I think she sort of brushed me off and said, yeah, go ahead and submit a proposal, because I really think that she thought we weren't going to get it. But lo and behold, we did, and she had already accepted invitations from many institutions for performances. There's a performance happening in November 13th at the MFA. Try to get in, it's completely sold out. She just opened 3 weeks ago at the Hangar Bicocca in Milan, one of her biggest exhibitions ever. It takes up 35,000 square feet of exhibition space. It's beautifully installed. It's got 20 major installation pieces in it. And at the opening night, my big fear was that you're going to walk in this cacophony of sound and lights, and everything was going to be confusing. But they did a fantastic job of installation. And in a way, it's perfect timing for us at the List, in that if you go visit that exhibition, which I hope you have the privilege to do, you will see and understand her body of work. And then in May, and that shows up until February, and then May of 2015, Joan will open in Venice, and it will all be new work. So you'll get the past, you'll get understanding, and then working with MIT, you will see the future. And obviously, MIT is always about the future, so we're delighted to be able to do this. And so Joan, being a brilliant practitioner of video performance and a pioneer in installation art, and she is among the most significant and important artists of our time. I truly believe in this. And so we invited Greg to speak about Joan. Greg?
Thank you very much. Is it working?
This isn't Joan.
That reminds me, turn off your phones, please.
It's working. Thank you, Paul. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. I'm really delighted. I want to underscore something that Paul said, how impressive and how right it is that Joan represents the U.S. At the next Venice Biennale. It's the highest honor, and it's something also wonderful for Liszt and for MIT. So this is just something really great that you can all be super proud of, and the visionary is sort of getting her due on the biggest of big stages. So I'm delighted. I want to say a couple of things, and something I've noticed through the years, which is unusual, or it's a little odd for me. I teach at VCU, as Paul told you, but also I've been at other places, and it's almost guaranteed, even with my elite graduate students, that only a small percentage of them will know, will have heard of Joan Jonas, and even much less than that will know something substantial about her work. And I find that really odd, and it's something that should change, because and I think Venice will help that. In my opinion, she is truly one of the great innovative visionary artists of the era, and hopefully I'll be able to reveal a little bit about why that might be the case. Joan is often called, as Paul mentioned, a pioneer of, it's amazing how many texts say this, a pioneer of video art, a pioneer, at its inception, a pioneer of performance art, a pioneer of body art, and all of that is true, but that doesn't really get to the heart of the matter about how expansive and how visionary she really is. And so I'll just give you an example, like a video can also be an installation and a performance and a sculpture, and live drawings can be part of that altogether. And another thing is that she often recycles and transforms and changes material from work to work. So something that appeared in a work from 3 years ago can appear in a new work. So everything is protean and in flux with this artist. But I think that there's two main problems about why this real visionary, innovative visionary is not as known as she should be, although that's changing somewhat. First is, it's tough for the art world to get to understand an artist thinking and working in this way. For her whole career, Joan Jonas has not been making like, this is the work, and it's this commodity, and it can be sold, and it can be done. She has works like this, but that's not the total focus. She's making once again a protean, changing, malleable, consciousness-infused kind of work that spans very many different mediums. And the second, sadly to say, but I think it's completely true, is the issue that is the fact that she's female. And in my opinion, and this is something from my heart, I guess my mind as well, without question, the most important thing that's happened in visual arts in my lifetime in the arts, now a couple decades, is the rise of women in the arts in the US and also globally. It's unprecedented in the Western tradition. This is fantastic. It's changing everything. But that doesn't mean that all is just wonderful. So there's any number, and I won't get into naming names, but there's any number, in my opinion, of less talented, less important artists, even some, in some ways, maybe perhaps influenced by Joan Jonas, who are much more well known, and my students would know them right away because, among other things, they're male. So in a way, that's, I think, what's going on. But I'd like to suggest one other possibility for you in Boston, for you in Cambridge, in Massachusetts, which is a friend of mine, Ralph Waldo Emerson from Concord, because I'd like to mention Emerson just a little bit for you, because I think, yes, Joan Jonas is a pioneer of all these things, but perhaps her significance goes way beyond that. Perhaps she's one of the chief artists, one of the central visionaries in the American tradition, reaching way back. And back in the 1840s, in Boston, in Concord, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, to my mind, the first great radical statement of art making produced in America after European settlement. It's his essay, The Poet, and if any of you are interested, I would recommend to go to it. It's a meditation on poetry, but it could be any other art form as well. And I won't talk so much about Emerson, but what Emerson wanted, he's moving from religion. He's a Unitarian minister. He's moving into art as the locus of his spiritual inquiry. What he wanted is for an art to be revelatory of the whole consciousness of the person, in profound cathartic engagement with the world, and he wanted art to matter that much, and to be able to seriously affect and alter consciousness altogether. And if you read that great early essay by Emerson, there's a moment that he goes, "For we are not pans and barrows, nor even porters of the fire and torch bearers, but children of the fire, made of it." I love this idea. I love this so much with an artist such as Joan Jonas. Emerson is a great maker of images to explain in terms of his ideas in philosophy. So the metaphor is a torch bearer, lighting the way. He says, like, we're not that. We're not that. We're children of the fire, made of this creative heat and light altogether. In the same essay, it's one of these great Emersonian moments that you first read it and you're like, okay, but then you think about it and you're like, what? Like, what does, and it's this: art is the path of the creator to his work. Think about that for a second. Like, what? I thought that art was the sculpture that the sculptor made, or the painting that the painter makes, or the composition that the composer makes. But way back in the 1840s, Ralph Waldo Emerson in early Victorian New England is making a radical assertion to change everything from like product to life, the life of the artist, how how an artist thinks and dreams and works and believes and changes and risks. Everything like that. That's the force that generates what we commonly call art. And I think that Joan Jonas is one heck of an example of this, an artist living her vision from beginning to end in a way that making an elastic, changing, ever-changing, ever-questing work that can take many forms. And the final thing I'll mention from Emerson is this. He writes, "For it is not meters, but a meter-making argument that makes a poem. A thought so passionate and alive that, like the spirit of a plant or an animal, it has an architecture of its own and adorns nature with a new thing." This is at a time when there were strict rules for writing poems. A sonnet has to have this many lines and this many beats. Emerson, once again, disrupts and erupts everything and says it's not meters, but a meter-making argument. what you have to bring, what you have to convey, can and indeed should find the necessary form, no matter how unorthodox and how seemingly odd or eccentric or strange that form might be. And I think that Joan Jonas, when you look at her career, it is exactly that, and impassioned ideas, impassioned instincts, impassioned quest that's seeking out and finding extraordinarily innovative forms. So that's it. So for me, yes, she's a great pioneer of all these things. On another level, she connects with a profoundly visionary and questing tradition in American art that goes in some ways back to Emerson and to Whitman, Walt Whitman, who said, I was simmering, he said at one point, I was simmering, simmering, simmering. Emerson brought me to a boil. So this is early Joan. This is early Joan, courageously standing, nude, with a mirror. And on one level, this early work seems so straightforward, but it isn't. Just think about what's going on. She can only see parts of herself in the mirror. Whatever audience is there is seeing something different. So right away, there's a kind of fragmentation that's going on, and making works, whole installations, whole performances out of combined fragments and multiple viewpoints, mediated viewpoints, will be something central to her. The body, in many ways, costumed or not, will become crucial to her. Look, if you can see, just a little bit about how the shadows are operating here in this early work. Those shadows, these projected selves, projected images, will become crucial to her work over time. So right here at this earliest work called Mirror Check, you're seeing some of the core elements that she will develop so fruitfully. Also, mirrors per se. She will go on to do really spectacular things with mirrors over the next few decades. For example, this, which doesn't it look like an iPad? Doesn't it look like an iPad 20 years before iPads were invented? Or a simple plate that reflects and distorts its surroundings, the nature that it is. Or mirrors that are also sculptures, moving, changing sculptures that are also reflecting the audience that's there, making scattery yet bedazzling and changing installations. And that's Joan in the front on this side. This is vertical roll, pioneer, Joan Jonas, pioneer of video art. Right at its inception, this is a work, vertical roll, that is still studied very much by historians of the medium as a crucial work in the history of video art. And for this work, Joan, ostentatiously dressed in this ultra-female garb, like a showgirl in Las Vegas, and old-time televisions before cable and all of this used to have a problem, which was the vertical roll, which means that the picture would go out of sync. She used this to her advantage as this ultra-feminine, and in some ways absurdly feminine character. She's trying to climb into the picture. And so climbing in and getting pushed out of the picture at the same time. And that aggressive percussive sound is also, I mean, it's disturbing, it's alarming, it's captivating, and it's worth remembering that works like that were also made at the height of a time of immense conflict in America with the Vietnam War and everything. So there's just hints of this going on. This is Joan Jonas, a pioneer, absolute pioneer of performance art at its inception. And here, she once again dressed up in her ultra-feminine female clothes as her alter ego, whose name is Organic Honey. And she has called herself an erotic electronic sorceress. And it's completely important to know for this work, which is once straightforward but also has a beguiling air of mystery and ritual. This wasn't done for an institution in its inception. This was just done in her loft for her friends in Manhattan. And it's Joan Jonas dressing up in her costumes. Joan Jonas using various props, some of them super casual, some of them really important, like things from her grandmother or even older, things with memory, evocative items of clothing and kinds of around the house things, which she's transforming and making, once again, evocative and riveting in a way. Even at this early stage of her career, Joan Jonas is now a pioneer of installation art. Look what's happening here. Like the video is playing, sculptures are there, performances happening somewhere else. This is the kind of aesthetic that would be developed years later and is still being developed now, but was almost completely unknown in her time, like this. So even in this costumed, in some ways carnivalesque environment of Organic Honey's visual telepathy, certain moments happen. So touching in a way. And this gets into a really interesting territory with Joan Jonas. Her eccentric, precise, questing work, how much of an emotional impact it can have, how suffused with life it really seems. This is, surprisingly, Emerson was a Unitarian that I told you in the New England tradition. This is another one. This is P.T. Barnum from Connecticut. P.T. Barnum, the father of the American circus and the Carnival, who believed, he made millions of dollars from all his hoaxes and from his traveling road shows, but he also believed that what he's doing was for the greater glory of God, because all his traveling circuses and tricks and hoaxes nonetheless brought people closer to the wonders of the Lord's creation. This is P.T. Barnum with General Tom Thumb. This is the most important museum of the mid-19th century, Barnum's American Museum in New York City, in which there would be taxidermy animals and all sorts of weird plants from around the world and paintings and fine art, everything mashed together. P.T. Barnum's great traveling menagerie, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey combined show, the tame tigers doing their tricks, and Joan Jonas, who Joan Jonas has said, and one has reason to believe her, that as a young girl, as a teenager, the circus was a profound influence on her. The circus, Barnum-esque spectacle, this is one of the core elements of Joan Jonas's work. And look how she's appearing here. As a performer, but also as the ringmaster of her own show. And this will be a preferred and important technique or tactic of Joan Jonas, that in the Joan Jonas circus, the Joan Jonas carnival, Joan Jonas spectacle, things will be happening simultaneously, just like a three-ring circus. So there won't be just one focal point. Your attention will be drawn here and then there. You'll forget things as you encounter new things. You'll remember what happened as you see something else. So what she's making is a special kind of work that's coming at you from multiple angles. And once again, there's here, or in her work, Sweeney Astray. And there are, of course, important animals in the circus. Joan Jonas is she's a pioneer of video art and body art, and she's also a pioneer of incorporating animals in many ways into her work and images of animals. If what I'm saying that Barnum and the circus and the carnival and spectacle are crucial for her, she's on pretty good ground, because Emily Dickinson, who lived west of here in Amherst, Massachusetts, wrote in a letter, 1866 letter to her friend Elizabeth Holland, "Friday, I tasted life. It was a vast morsel. A circus passed the house. Still I feel the red in my mind, though the drums are out." And she's on very good ground, because Walt Whitman, the greatest poet, in my opinion, in the American tradition, writing anonymously in the magazine Life Illustrated, described the circus as a national institution. This was a time in the 19th century when the circus was a profoundly shady enterprise, that polite people would hesitate to go to, hesitate to have their children go to. Whitman got it. In Joan Jonas's own era, one of the most renowned artists of the time, Bruce Nauman, is also one of the most successful users of circus tropes and carnival gear, including this work, Mean Clown Welcome, in which two clowns, male, greet each other, and in a most male way get aroused and de-aroused over and over, a work of attraction and repulsion, violence and loneliness. Or Nauman's, one of his several carousels, alarming carousel, dangerous carousel made of flayed taxidermy animals. These are just carnival influences that are happening in the climate around Joan Jonas. Or Vito Acconci with his famous work Seedbed, in which he's hunched under a sloped floor, masturbating for days on end while intoning fantasies of the unseen viewers above him in a smarmy carnival barker, come hither voice. Dress up is crucial for the carnival. Costumes are crucial for the carnival. And the early Cindy Sherman, with her film stills from the late 70s, is changing the whole identity she conveys with her dress up and her costumes. And later, Cindy Sherman just gravitated into being a clown altogether. Lawrence Weiner is recognized broadly, widely, as the greatest conceptual artist of his time. Look at this work from Venice, the Italian Pavilion. It looks very much like a carnival structure, a Coney Island building. And that's the thing about Lawrence Weiner. He's sculpting with words, he's sculpting with ideas, he's a conceptual artist, but those words also have a distinct visual power, the signage that he brings. Costumes are crucial to the carnival, and this is from Joan now. And animals doing tricks are crucial to the carnival, like this white dog jumping through a hoop. And this is Joan at her best. Just this riveting image that comes to you. It is carnivalesque. It is costumed. It involves an animal, in this case a stuffed coyote. But it has such enthralling power, at least for me. It seems extremely thoughtful and also sad and solemn and antic, all of these things happening at the same time. Richard Tuttle, who's a great sort of post-minimalist sculptor, has recently released an interview, which is an amazing interview. He's almost in tears in it, in which he talks about art, and I think I understand what he means. He's talking about late Goya, but he could have been talking about any of a number of people. What he's interested in is an extraordinary invisibility in terms of art, and I think I totally get that. This is a very visual work. It's a riveting visual work, but the extraordinary invisibility is the whole psychological, emotional climate that surrounds it. A work that can bring you close to states of being, complex states of being that you might have no language to express. Combinations of unruliness and grace, agitation and repose. That's something at which Joan excels. One thing Joan, I would say, is largely understood in terms of being like what you could call an indoor artist, pioneer of video art, performance art, body art. However, it's really not the case. And right from the beginning of her career, from the earliest works, she's been going out into nature, and having these cathartic encounters in which nature is not just a site for a work, but a place, a consciousness-changing place, in which the work is an encounter with the site, with nature, with all its elements. This is her work, Wind. Her first movie, by the way, in which friends just went out on a windy day, and here's what happens. She has referred to this, the wind becomes a character in the work. The wind, the unruly wind, the ever-changing wind, the wind that far dominates our little moment in time. She made for such a work so that this wind came into her work, and the people who are there, once again, not famous performers at this point, just her friends out at the beach on a windy day interacting with the wind. This is Joan's Beach piece from a little later, 2 years later, in which the audience was a full quarter mile from the piece and could only just barely make out some of the things that were happening. Look at the circus-like spectacle, circus-like things going on here, but also what's happening, and this will be a prime thing for Joan Jonas, distances are operating here. Nature, cycles of creation and destruction, erosion and coherence, all of these things happening simultaneously as people clapping pieces of wood together to send sound off into the distance so you can hardly hear it. Or Joan, the ringmaster herself, in her costume, atop a ladder, holding a mirror that's also catching and reflecting the sun itself back at the audience along, once again, a quarter mile of the way. With these works, and this will happen later, Joan will pick up on, and this I think is something really worth considering, she will pick up an Emerson again, but a nature-based tradition in American art involving heightened consciousness outdoors, which is then channeled into art. That's what Emerson wanted. Immersive experiences in nature that can rearrange your psyche and consciousness, and then you can bring that back into art. That's certainly what affected Thomas Moran and other famous painters of the Hudson River School and painters of the American West, or like Frederick Church, who these painters, famous painters, went out basically with Emerson in their backpacks. He's emboldened them to paint in a new way the American, or as the case may be, South American landscape. Even more pertinent is something closer to here, which is American luminism, which occurred just a little bit north of Boston and Cambridge, and around Gloucester and Ipswich, with artists such as Fitzhenry Lane, who's just painting the local environment, but in such a sublime and subtle way in which you totally feel that this is indeed spiritually charged, this place. Edward Hopper, I'm sure you know him in some ways, was a lifelong autodidactic scholar, reader of Emerson. And so this Emersonian notion of the sublime, an intense engagement with nature, just coming into the painting is just hinting at it in the way the sunlight slants into the room. Or the great Barnett Newman, who, with his zips, his famous zips, which are stripes in an abstract painting, but which also function as portals into an exalted consciousness or into vastness and distances altogether. When Barnett Newman got married, he was like a substitute high school teacher at that point. When he got married, at his wife's instigation, Annalie, they went on their honeymoon not to Bermuda, not to Tahiti, but to Concord, Massachusetts, to visit sites associated with Emerson and Transcendentalism. Agnes Martin moves to New Mexico and begins to channel the remarkable New Mexico desert and sky and light, gradations of light into her paintings. And Walter de Maria does something similar, but with a different medium, with his lightning field, in which a square kilometer of poles are out there in the desert and sometimes catch and respond to this primal force of the lightning altogether. Or James Turrell, the greatest Quaker artist of your lives, in my opinion, making works that are not projections, or not paintings, or not videos, but this is the sky itself, excised out of a section of the ceiling. Or Nancy Holt, way out in Nevada. Or Robert Smithson with Spiral Jetty. By the way, that's me and my son Maximilian, when Maximilian was pretty little. And you can stay at Spiral Jetty. And does anyone know this? It's a very good idea to stay at Spiral Jetty because it changes all the time. What looks so monumental isn't. It's constantly changing. Sometimes it's super dark. Sometimes it's like apparitional in white. Sometimes the water's pink. Sometimes it's dark blue. The reason you can stay there and camp there is not because camping and staying is allowed. It's because the government, the power of the government just doesn't reach that far. This is that remote. And salty, and science-fictive, and weird, and ethereal, and sublime, and lovely. So this is also a crucial tradition in American art, which you wouldn't normally think of Joan Jonas as being part of. But look at this. This is Waltz, a little lesser-known piece by Joan Jonas in her beloved Nova Scotia. And here she is, advancing on you in full regalia with her white dog. group of friends go out, some in their carnival costumes, some not, into the Nova Scotia woods and onto the beach to enact their somewhat eccentric but also routine and mundane encounters. And it turns this experience into something so oddly poetic, so utterly riveting, even though it's as normal as possible. And then it's like a pageant, a ceremony that you can't quite place, something absolutely wondrous, which you can't quite determine why it is so. And then there's that white dog. A white dog, one of many in Joan Jonas's works through the years, which makes her something also, a different kind of pioneer, a pioneer of white dog art. And this is the kind. Here's something important to remember, to know about Joan Jonas. She has all these props that she's using, but they're never tricky. You can see exactly what it is. So the thing itself, as it normally is, a mirror, a little stick, and the thing itself, as it's been substantially, decisively transformed, coexist. That's a Joan Jonas world, and it's like a very unusual way of making art. That the mundane and the stunning, the mundane and the wondrous are fused. And here's, you see this, the blindfolded woman at the beach. Here's how Waltz ends. Sky is the daily bread of the eyes, Emerson wrote in his journals, conflating Bible and earth. That for Waltz, after all of this lovely, lilting, but sometimes somewhat alarming activity, the end is just openness to this vast Canadian sky, to eternity, to nature per se. And the sound that you're hearing, Joan is marvelously inventive. It's just stones that she was tossing to make this haunting music. Emerson wrote, we want, also in his journals, we want the exact and the vast. We want our dreams and our mathematics, thereby getting at a way of thought, but also a way of art making that is at once cerebral and profoundly questing, even magical in some ways. The exact and the vast. This is the beginning of Volcano Saga, and one of the really a kind of new phase in Joan Jonas's work, in which her great works are launched by a specific literary text that she doesn't explicate, that she doesn't pin down or turn into a script. She'll use certain quotes from it, certain energies from it, and be launched from there. This work, Volcano Saga, for which she went to Iceland, a place I love and which is deeply in my heart and soul, she just went there on her own, not under the auspices of an institution. And the text is the Laxdæla Saga, which is one of the great texts of medieval Icelandic literature, the sagas. And there's a crucial figure in the Laxdæla Saga who is Gudrun, one of the great, powerful women in literary history. So the exact and the vast, and coming together around one person who's telling her dreams. This is Gudrun, played one of the rare times by a famous actress, Tilda Swinton. And so this is out there, and this is how, with all this stuff I said just now, I mean, if the exact and the vast, the cerebral and quest, the mundane and the wondrous. Listen to Joan Jonas's voice.
The wind was blowing like mad. I pushed myself toward the top of the car and undid my seatbelt just as a young, pale man appeared at the window and asked if I was all right. I was busy crawling around in the smashed roof of the car, looking for small things. The wind blew everything away. Then a rather large man appeared and offered to take me to the crossroads, to the restaurant there, to call the police. I trembled and leaned into the wind. I climbed into the back of his big soft car and we crept down the road. They told me I had been blown off the road by the wind. The radio said, "Woman blown off the road by the wind." We reached the crossroads, and I got out. There was no restaurant. There was no crossroads. It was Iceland, 1,000 years ago.
And then the Volcano Saga, the movie, will go into a highly mediated encounter between Gudrun and Gest, her cousin, in which her dreams are being deciphered.
In your second dream, you had a silver ring on your hand. This means a second husband, who is an excellent man, and whom you will love dearly. But only for a short time. I wouldn't be surprised if you were to lose him in a drowning accident. This is all I shall make of this dream.
The encounter between the two cousins is erotically charged. It's profoundly thoughtful and engaged. And out of this, Gudrun emerges as a woman dancing with a volcano. This is Lines in the Sand, and I just quickly show you how different installations can look by Joan. Like here in Barcelona, and here in New York City as the set for her performance. Lines in the Sand is launched by H.D. Hilda Doolittle, great modernist poet. Her poem Helen in Egypt, which basically, the famous Helen of Troy, it basically is a questioning concerning that it's very possible that this Helen of Troy didn't exist in this manner, but it's also a phantom, a figment, a projection of different forces at that time. This is how it begins. Just Joan is like an extraordinary maker of images. Just herself and her dog on the sand. She also weaves in images that her grandmother took in Cairo in the early part of the 20th century.
These pictures are so clear. They are like transparencies set before candles in a dark room. I may or may not have mentioned these incidents to the professor, but they were there. Upon the elaborate buildup of past memories, across the intricate network made by the hairlines that divided one irregular bit of the picture puzzle from another, there fell inevitably a shadow, a writing on the wall, a curve like a reversed, unfinished S with a dot beneath it, a question mark, the shadow of a question. Is this it? The question mark threatens the shadow, the apparently most satisfactory answer. For myself, I consider this sort of dream, or projected picture, or vision, as a sort of halfway state between an ordinary dream and the vision of those who, for lack of a more definite term, we must call psychics or clairvoyants.
And from there, the work moves not into Egypt, but into Las Vegas, into the Luxor Casino in Las Vegas, a sham Egypt, a fake Sphinx, with images that are coming at you once again from many different ways. And inside this appalling fake Egypt, with all its razzle-dazzle Barnum-esque entertainment and its blackjack tables and its fake pharaohs. And then there's Joan, and once again in her full costume, dancing outside in a kind of gritty part of Las Vegas. But you can see the landscape peeking in, slanting in, the rugged Nevada desert, the desert for real, and that will become a huge part of this work as well. Quickly but lovingly seen, this vastness, this geology, this power. So conflation of America and Egypt and ancient history and current life. And this was a work that was done.
Was it a game played over and over with numbers or counters? Who set the scene? Who lured the players from home or imprisoned them in the walls to inspire us with endless, intricate questioning? Why did they fight at all? Was Helen demon or goddess? How did they scale the walls? Was the iron horse an ancient symbol or a new battering ram? Was Helen another symbol? A star, a ship, or a temple? How will the story end?
She doesn't address head-on in any way the war that was occurring then and there are wars occurring now. She hints at it. She suggests it. She's a great visual poet of angles and of things that are coming at you from different ways. Emily Dickinson, in one of her great poems, wrote, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies." And I love that idea of slant truth coming, and that's something that's happening in a profound way throughout Joan Jonas's work. The shape, the scent, the feel of things is based on Abby Warburg, who was a great and very unusual German art historian, way ahead of his time, who is making wild connections between images from many different cultures, far outside of the European canon, and was also in a mental institution for quite some time. So the actual text that Joan used, by the way, Joan is also making these connections between wildly diverse things. The text that she used is Abby Warburg's trying to prove that he's actually sane, like his speech to the doctors that actually convinced them in the end that he's sane. So look at this, and this is their Joan's version of the psychiatric clinic sanitarium where Abby Warburg was. There's the Carnival thing again. There's the mirroring element in which all of his Abby Warburg's wild organizing system for images is hinted at, and His complex psychology is also hinted at in the endless video reflections. And there's sadness in someone who's caught in a place like that. And the way Joan addresses this sadness is by a homemade version of Durer's Melancholia.
I devoured entire piles of 19th century Indian novels.
This is Abby Warburg, so the actor speaking as Abby.
It was my way of escaping from an unsettling present. Romance left in my memory by a book. The grotesque richness of pioneer life in the American West. I sniffed at my mother's grave illness like a frightened animal.
Serpent in lightning shape. American campaign. Form of a house. An irrational animal figure.
Part of the source, part of the deep energies for this whole work is an experience that Joan had as a young woman going to a sacred, it's almost impossible to get into, Hopi ceremony in the American Southwest, which Abby Warburg had also done many decades before. She improvises with a mirror. She makes her melancholic Dürer-esque work. It's all combining. A coyote is appearing, spirit of the American West. It comes with her. It interacts with her dog in the video, and there are also occasional just cuts to American power, wires and wind and trains and wires in the West. And then inexplicably, and this is one of these remarkable risks that Joan just does, that it seems like, what? But it makes so much sense. The work goes to the Salton Sea, which is a really kind of abandoned, incredibly salty place in California, which was a resort for a little while, but now is a wreck, a ruin. about such works by Joan for me also is that it's best to surrender to the flow, to give yourself to the flow of the work in many ways, and just be transported through all the different twists and turns and depths and layers of the psyche where the mysteries are. And here's how this work, after this elegiac, sad moment, ends. Abby Warburg walks out, and the garage door goes up. This was at Dia Beacon. And suddenly, the whole place was flooded by the light of the real world. And in his essay, Nature, from 1836, Ralph Waldo Emerson theorized about ecstatic encounters with nature, but he rarely attempted to say what they might be like, except for this great and famous moment in his essay, Nature. It's the famous moment that goes, crossing a bare common. By the way, that's Boston Commons, you know, not somewhere up in the Himalayas or Yosemite, just downtown Boston. Crossing a bare common in snow puddles at twilight under a clouded sky without having in my thoughts any occurrence of special good fortune. I have enjoyed a perfect exhilaration. I am glad to the brink of fear, standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air, and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. Love this image of a transparent eyeball. The self, the world flowing into the self, into the self into the world, and a fluid exchange between consciousness and world, nature, or art and world. And that's really what happened here in a extraordinary moment, stop you in your tracks moment at the end of the Dia performance. This is the last work I'll tell you about, reanimation. It also segues into Draw Without Looking, and it's launched by this writer, Nobel Prize winner from Iceland, Halldór Laxness. And this very special book that Halldór Laxness wrote called Under the Glacier, but in the Icelandic title is Christianity and the Glacier. And it's basically a meditation on God and geology. Like, how is it possible with God and salvation when you're at like this profound, unbelievable geologic force of the Snæfellsnes glacier and volcano, where Jules Verne wrote, you know, Journey to the Center of the Earth. This is one version of reanimation at the last Documenta, a little housey in the park outside of the main place in Kassel. You went to the window and looked in to see vastness, to see mountains and glaciers and mineral things, and the power of the earth and the beauty of the earth coming at you in different ways. And it also exists as a performance.
Reanimation. Better to be silent. That is what the glacier does. That is what the lilies of the field do. Are you sure the flowers are silent? If a sensitive microphone were placed beside them? As a matter of fact, others are ready to help. There is, for instance, the weather, and there is the law of gravity, and last but not least, time. No one is a match for them.
Meditation on Iceland, on glaciers, on the north, on the sublime, is actually, the images occur in far, far north Norway, where Joan was, and lovingly dwells on what she saw and what she sees there. It's sublime, but as you know, the sublime can also be terrifying. such encounters with nature can also be wondrous, delicate, and whimsical. For example, just drawing on the snow. And in the far north of Norway, also of Sweden and Finland, live the Samis, S-A-M-I, with their special music called the yoik music. This is another of her remarkable decisions, instincts, creative decisions. Joan's work is profoundly serious and also playful, sorrowful and also delightful. It involves animals. In this case, Joan attempting to feed the animals who are on the video. It involves little things that can't be collected or sold at the gallery, like a snow drawing, or making a quasi-Icelandic shape just out of what's near at hand. And here, this is when in Brooklyn, when sitting, I think in the first or second row, completely lost it in total tears, involuntary. Such is the humanity just in this work with this, such is the complicated humanity this woman brings into her work. Once again, so much depth and sorrow and love and joy and fear and stalwart strength, all operating just in such a moment. And that it can affect one profoundly. I didn't mention to you that in her one of the real sources for Joan Jonas in her early days was poetry, studying poetry, American modernist poetry, and the structure of poems. That's really crucial about how she's putting works together. So I'd like to conclude with a really short poem by Wallace Stevens, great modernist poet, but I'd like to change one word, and I assume that Wallace Stevens wouldn't mind. And the word I'll change is man into woman. In the end, however naked, tall, there is still the impossible, possible philosopher's woman. The woman who has had the time to think enough. The central woman. The human globe, responsive as a mirror with a voice. The woman of glass, who in a million diamonds sums us up. Thank you very much. If anyone wants to have any questions or comments, now might be a good time. But it's like totally up to you. Sure.
I always have a question.
Good.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between performance and documentation?
Yeah, it's all.
The challenge for the art historian and the critic.
Right.
And in the earliest Joan Jonas pieces, who was taking the pictures?
Actually, that's a good question. I don't know who took for the earliest ones, but it's a fundamental question. But in the way how I would answer that is, I think the documentation is separate For example, for reanimation, which you see, I mean, they had cameras. You can see like cameras from the left, cameras from the right, and they get different parts of the actual thing. But what's fascinating is how in the midst of this, she's bringing so many other things together. For example, video plus live performance plus drawing plus singing plus music. All of these things are happening at the same time. So I wouldn't want to speak for her, but I know that the documentation is something different. Documentation being like documentation of an actual performance. But by the way, here's something else really also very interesting about Joan Jonas. Like, we use this word performance, but what's fascinating is like she's in costume oftentimes. She's a transformed figure, but she's not another character. She's like Joan Jonas transformed. That's that's really crucial for her work. So once again, it's like the usual person and that person wildly, decisively transformed is happening at the same time. She's not trying to become someone else. She's becoming like a more even extreme version of herself. And I find that incredible. And you also see that throughout her actions, her performances, when most of her movements are just normal. You know, they're not like unbelievable acrobatic things. It's just like walking and drawing and just like really basic human things that then take on a completely exalted and intense quality in her work. Once again, for me, it's like the mundane, the normal, and the remarkable share close quarters in Joan Jonas's work. There was another question. Hi.
Is this on? I actually wanted to speak to your question a little bit, which is my feeling that in Jonas's work, actually the difference between documentation and the work is a lot more clear than in a lot of others' works that were sort of happening at the same time. Because in all of her single screen videos that are being distributed, she was very careful to make a separate version that would be the single screen version, like Song Delay, which is based on Delay Delay, that was the performance in the landscape, and there's sort of countless others where there's a very different single screen version that then sometimes gets combined back into another performance, like Volcano Saga, which was a piece produced for television and then also feeds back into the performative work. And then I think if you see the more recent performances like Lines in the Sand, it's pretty clear that somebody in the Documenta team just kind of taped the performance, and I don't think there's any sense at all that this is really a very good or even like authoritative representation of the performance.
Yeah, that's right. There was a question down here.
Thank you. I was just struck by how homemade everything looked.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest thing I could think of in my own experience was like something by Robert Wilson, but that's so finished and highly crafted, and this is so playful and low-tech and homemade, like you can imagine.
And sometimes whoppingly sad as well. It can be. You're right. I mean, you're absolutely right.
So, that must have been a very deliberate choice and strategy.
It's a completely deliberate strategy. But one should. There's nothing in the end homemade about her work. She's employing homemade strategies, but she's as rigorous a thinker, as rigorous a crafter of works from beginning to end that you're likely to find on this earth. You know, those are like, here's another example. I showed you a Zip by Barnett Newman. That dude had chops. He could paint anything and paint it super well. He chose to paint one precise yet ragged little line. You know, so that's like his decision to make this seemingly casual thing, but there's a lot of thought that went into that, and an enormous amount of just thought and creativity and intensity goes into Joan Jonas's just decisions about how things are going to happen and what is going to be worn. And you know, her works are also like sculptures unfolding in, or like occurring in time. There's something incredibly sculptural about her work altogether. But so those casual things, you just saw this one sequence from Lines in the Sand, in which they're just adjusting this like little horse and the carriage. I mean, all of that's so precise how they did that, and all of those little things which seem casual and homemade have huge resonance. The horse connects to the Trojan horse, you know, to animal spirits from different cultures, which she knows a lot about. Things unfold many different meanings, all of her like props and everything like that. So in the midst of this seemingly homemade aesthetic, it's like complete and total rigor and intensity, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. It's nothing about like the found object. It's about like the transformed objects.
I had an observation I like to verify or check with you. In the image of woman with stick and mirror, it sounded like an allusion to the justice, statue of the justice. So the scale is replaced by the mirror, and instead of sword.
It's probably completely true.
And it seems to be, it is not so much scale, but by looking ourselves, we can reach, maybe.
I think that's a very good point.
I want to thank Gregory for tonight.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And I just want to finish by saying that, you know, Venice Biennale is the oldest biennale that exists. It's been going on since 1859. And what's also important to remind ourselves is that it's not a lifetime achievement award. It's where professionals, museum directors and curators sit there, and they pick the artist that they think who is the most interesting today. So they feel Joan needs a presence, and I'm so happy that it's happening. And since 1859, some of the people who's represented America includes Rauschenberg, Johns, Pollock, Gober, Lichtenstein, and now it's going to be Jonas. So we couldn't be happier. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much.